Friedrich Nietzsche is one of the most famous and influential philosophers of the modern era. He is best known for his extreme skepticism of European thought, his focus on growth and willpower, and his belief that people must abandon inherited truth and make meaning for themselves. Nietzsche's ideas have influenced an extraordinary range of thinkers, including philosophers, psychologists, writers, artists, political theorists, and religious scholars. His written works helped shape movements like existentialism, postmodernism, humanistic psychology, and depth psychology. But if Friedrich Nietzsche were alive today, what would he think of psychology? Would he be impressed with the scientific advances that have been made, or would he be disappointed in the overall direction of the field? In order to understand what Nietzsche might think, we need to examine Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or superhuman. Far from being a biological or political ideal, the Übermensch was Nietzsche's vision of what human beings could become when they transcended conventional thinking and took responsibility for creating their own values. Friedrich Nietzsche talks most extensively about the Übermensch in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I teach you the Superman. Man is something that is to be surpassed. What have ye done to surpass man? All beings hitherto have created something beyond themselves, and you want to be the ebb of that great tide, and would rather go back to the beast than surpass man. What is the ape to man? A laughingstock, a thing of shame. And just the same shall man be to the Superman, a laughingstock, a thing of shame. What is the greatest thing you can experience? It is the hour of great content, the hour in which even your happiness becomes loathsome unto you, and also your reason and virtue. Man is a rope, stretched between the animal and the Superman, a rope over an abyss. A dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. Here, Nietzsche is talking about the Übermensch in terms of overcoming oneself, surpassing one's own humanity. And later on in the book and elsewhere in his writings, he connects this idea to letting go of inherited values and inherited thought, especially European religious thought, and creating one's own values and overcoming the world. There are many schools of thought in psychology, but there are 5 in particular that have dominated the field for decades. They are psychoanalysis, which was invented by Sigmund Freud, that links past traumas to present-day illness. There's also behaviorism, which is very scientific and detached and understands observable and measurable behavior. Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers came up with humanistic psychology, which explores human potential and the theme of self-actualization. There's positive psychology, which studies what makes humans thrive. And there's developmental psychology, which studies how humans grow across the lifespan. Given Nietzsche's interest in human development, it is likely that he would be fascinated by humanistic psychology, developmental psychology, and positive psychology. Unlike many branches of psychology that focus primarily on pathology and dysfunction, these fields attempt to understand excellence, self-transformation, and the achievement of someone's full potential. So, what do the leading thinkers in these fields have to say about becoming superhuman? What might Nietzsche think of them? First, we'll look at Abraham Maslow. You've probably heard of Abraham Maslow in terms of his hierarchy of needs, which ranks different needs in order of their importance. However, what most people don't realize about Abraham Maslow is that he spent the later stages of his career exclusively studying the highest performing people he could find. He was fascinated by the idea of self-actualization and human potential, and he intentionally sought out the wisest, most accomplished people that he could find, and he talked to them to understand their psychology. From this work, Abraham Maslow concluded that self-actualization is actually a core goal of humanity. And he realized that a big part of self-actualization is fulfilling one's potential. Not just in terms of your career, not just in terms of your hobbies and interests and skills, but your psychological potential. Abraham Maslow also had an issue with mainstream psychology because mainstream psychology focused primarily on pathology and people who were unwell. Abraham Maslow very strongly felt that in order to properly understand human nature, scientists had to look at the top performing human beings, the most developed human beings. And at that point in time and afterwards, psychology hadn't been doing that. So what would Nietzsche think about Abraham Maslow? Nietzsche would probably very much like Maslow's focus on the highest performing specimens. He would agree with Maslow that this makes scientific sense and validates Nietzsche's intuition about the Übermensch. Nietzsche would probably also very much like Maslow's work on self-actualization, because that validates Nietzsche's intuition that human beings must choose their own values and be everything that they can be. And Nietzsche would very much like the general focus of Abraham Maslow's later work, because the difference between self-actualized humans and non-self-actualized humans is big enough that it also validates Nietzsche's work on the Übermensch. Another psychologist that Nietzsche would like is Jacques Mezirow, who authored Transformative Dimensions of Adult Learning. Mezirow was primarily an educational psychologist who studied how people engaged in learning and how they transformed their perspectives throughout their learning experiences. Mezirow is famous for developing a transformative learning cycle, which he said is the general process by which someone comes to transforming themselves through a learning experience. First, there's a disorienting dilemma. Second, someone examines themselves in relation to the dilemma. Third, they make a critical assessment of themselves and the situation. They recognize issues that they have that they need to address. They explore new information. They plan a course of action. They acquire new knowledge. They try on different roles. They build confidence. And finally, they integrate the transformation. This is very, very similar to what Nietzsche was talking about when he discussed overgoings and downgoings. Although Nietzsche never explicitly talks about what he meant by downgoing, the general idea that he's discussing here is that there needs to be a crisis or a disorienting dilemma that someone needs to work through in order to become an Übermensch, in order to become all that they can be. The final psychologist that we'll examine is someone that you've probably never heard of, Jane Loevinger. In the 1950s, she studied and worked under Erik Erikson, and she is famous for a sentence completion test that measures someone's perspective-taking ability. Through her work, she discovered that consciousness grows and expands over the lifetime in response to transformative experiences. She developed ego development theory, which describes the growth of someone's ego and perspective over their lifespan. In general, Jane Loevinger found that there are 3 different types of consciousness that people can have. Pre-formal consciousness, which is preoccupied with social norms, power dynamics, and conformity. Formal consciousness, which is preoccupied with logic, achievement, and status. And post-formal consciousness, where someone is able to actually develop their own values, escape their ego, escape their cultural conditioning, and become all that they can be in a psychological sense. Through Jane Loevinger's work, we've found that about 77% of people occupy formal consciousness, and only 18% of people occupy post-formal consciousness. And Nietzsche would probably be absolutely fascinated by this work, because he emphasized that the Übermensch is qualitatively different than the human beings that he knew in his time. The fact that this has been validated by developmental psychology would be something that Nietzsche would be very excited by. So, when Friedrich Nietzsche would look at psychology, what would he say? First, he would acknowledge that incredible discoveries have been made by people like Abraham Maslow, Jacques Mezirow, and Jane Loevinger. Second, he would be concerned about the warped priorities of the field. Nietzsche would probably be appalled at how psychology is focusing on issues other than the perfection of the species. And third, Nietzsche would be very, very curious about how to put all these discoveries into practice in a practical, useful way that could help the greatest amount of people for the least amount of cost and resources. And so that is a Nietzschean look at psychology.